I sat quietly in the front pew of the church, hands folded neatly in my lap, eyes fixed on the gleaming mahogany coffin positioned at the altar. My mother rested inside, a woman I had spent a lifetime trying desperately to impress. Yet, in the end, she made it brutally clear, I would never be enough. Tears threatened at the corners of my eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They came from a place far deeper, a longing for closure I knew I'd never truly receive. Beside me, my sister Sabrina let out a carefully timed sniffle, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a delicate, lace-trimmed handkerchief. She had an uncanny ability to make every moment, even a funeral, orbit around her. As the priest offered the final blessing, Sabrina emitted a soft, theatrical sob and leaned into her husband, Ethan. He wrapped a protective arm around her shoulder. She looked pristine, as always, her form-fitted designer black dress flattering her figure, her blonde curls cascading in polished waves. Even in mourning, she commanded attention. I swallowed the tight knot forming in my throat and cast a glance toward the second row. My aunt and uncle sat there, their posture stiff, their eyes refusing to meet mine. The rest of the family mirrored their discomfort. They all knew. I had braced myself for what was coming. I told myself I wouldn't let it affect me. But nothing could have softened the impact of the lawyer's words after the service. "I'm sorry, Jenna," Mr. Langford said as he adjusted his glasses and flipped through the paperwork of my mother's will. "Your parents have left everything to Sabrina." A frigid stillness crept through my limbs. "All of it?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. He hesitated before replying, "Yes. They believed you were self-sufficient and didn't require any financial assistance. Sabrina, being a full-time mother, was seen as needing the support more." My fingers clenched the fabric of my dress. The injustice made my chest burn. Sabrina had 3 properties in her name, a husband pulling in a 6-figure salary, and luxury vehicles in her driveway. I, on the other hand, had put myself through college, balancing 2 part-time jobs without ever once asking for help. But apparently that made me unworthy. "That's ridiculous," Aunt Doreen muttered, finally breaking the tense silence. Sabrina, however, didn't look remotely surprised. She merely released a weary sigh as though this inheritance was some heavy cross she had to bear. "It kind of makes sense," she murmured gently, placing a well-manicured hand on mine as if offering consolation. "You've always been so strong, Jenna. So independent. Mom and Dad just wanted to give me a little extra help, that's all." I slid my hand out from under hers. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked in a low, almost inaudible tone. Her lips parted briefly. They may have hinted at it," she confessed, eyes downcast. And there it was. The truth. I wanted to explode, to scream, to demand why even in death my parents found a way to reinforce the message that I had never measured up. But years of being sidelined had taught me a painful truth. Rage changed nothing. So I smiled. Because if they thought I had been independent before, they had absolutely no idea what I was truly capable of. Turning to Mr. Langford, I spoke smoothly. "Thank you for your time," I said, rising and reaching for my purse. "I won't be contesting the will." Sabrina blinked. "Wait, you're not angry?" I gave her a long, calm look, then leaned closer until only she could hear my voice. "Oh, Liv," I whispered, a faint smile curling my lips. "I don't need their money." Her shoulders visibly relaxed, misinterpreting my words as surrender. I turned and walked out of that office with my chin held high. What Sabrina didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had already planned a final gesture for our dear parents. One that no one would ever forget. There was a time, at least I believe there was, when my parents saw me. Really saw me. Maybe when I was a toddler, tugging on my mother's skirt or babbling nonsense to my father. But as we grew up, the contrast between Sabrina and me became impossible to overlook. She was the radiant one, the daughter who could do no wrong. I was the shadow behind her spotlight, the afterthought. It started with the little things. When Sabrina won her first dance recital at the age of 6, my parents threw her a grand party, complete with a cake shaped like ballet slippers. That same year, I came first in a spelling bee. My mother gave me a quick pat on the head and said, "Good job. Keep trying." When Sabrina turned 16, she received a brand new car with a massive red bow on top. When my 16th birthday arrived, I got a second-hand bicycle. "You don't go out much anyway, Jenna," my mother had said. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. That I didn't need their validation. That I didn't crave their love. But deep down it cut every time. Still, I pushed forward. While Sabrina coasted through life on charm and favoritism, I carved my own path. I put myself through college, worked tirelessly at 2 part-time jobs, secured a stable career in finance, and carefully invested every dollar I earned. I never leaned on anyone. I built my own foundation. And yet, in the end, it still wasn't enough. That night, I sat in my modest apartment staring at the ceiling, the lawyer's words looping in my mind. Your parents left everything to Sabrina. Of course they had. Why would I expect anything else? My phone buzzed, pulling me from the haze. A message from Aunt Doreen lit up the screen. Jenna, I just want you to know, I think what your parents did was shameful. You deserved so much more. Another message followed seconds later. You should fight it. Contest the will. It's not right. Fair, I whispered aloud. The word made me laugh. Nothing about my childhood had ever been fair. I'd come to terms with that long ago. But what I couldn't accept, what still burned, was Sabrina sitting there pretending this entire situation was just another mild inconvenience. Pretending she hadn't known all along. I didn't want their money. But that didn't mean I wouldn't leave my own mark on their legacy. I opened my laptop and logged into my email. There was someone I needed to contact, a particular lawyer who could help me find the truth. 1 week later, I found myself standing outside my parents' house, no, Sabrina's house now. The place still smelled the same, freshly trimmed grass and that familiar trace of lavender perfume my mother always wore. But it hadn't felt like home in years. Sabrina opened the door, surprise flashing across her face. Jenna? I didn't expect you. Of course not, I replied evenly. I just came to pick up a few things. Mom had some personal letters and keepsakes I'd like to hold on to. She hesitated for a beat, then stepped aside with a polite smile. Sure. Take whatever you need. I stepped inside, the weight of old memories pressing in from all sides. There was the living room where I had watched my parents shower Sabrina with praise. The dining table where I'd sat quietly while they gushed over her latest achievement. I made my way to my father's old study, the real reason for my visit. I opened the desk drawer, my fingers brushing across worn notebooks, aged documents, and bundles of letters. Then I saw it. The original version of the will. I had already reviewed the official document, the one the lawyer had read after the funeral. But this version was different. On the very first page, there it was, a clause that had been omitted in the final version. It clearly stated that my parents' estate was to be divided equally between Sabrina and me. My breath caught. My grip on the paper tightened. Sabrina hadn't just accepted the favoritism. She had altered their wishes. I turned slowly, heart pounding, only to find Sabrina standing in the doorway, arms folded across her chest. You weren't supposed to see that, she said, her voice level, almost indifferent. I stared at her in silence, waiting for something in explanation, a shred of remorse. But all I got was a shrug. Mom and Dad always meant for me to have everything, she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I just made sure it happened. In that moment, I felt a wave of hatred I'd never known before. I could have screamed. I could have marched to a lawyer and revealed everything. But instead, I smiled. Thank you for being honest, I said calmly. That's all I needed to hear. Without another word, I walked out of that house, already planning my next move. Because Sabrina had just made a critical mistake. She believed I would walk away quietly. She still thought I was the same forgotten girl she'd always overshadowed. But she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The truth had been buried in my father's desk, waiting for me to find it. My parents had intended to divide their legacy between us. Sabrina ensured that never happened. She hadn't merely embraced her title as the favorite, she had taken everything. And she thought I would do what I'd always done, stay quiet, swallow the injustice, and carry on. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I spent the next week meticulously planning. I could have gone straight to a lawyer, could have challenged the will in court. But legal battles were slow, chaotic, and Sabrina was cautious. I had no doubt she'd already covered her tracks. This required something else. Something smarter. Something that would strike where it hurt the most. And to do it, I needed help from the right person. I found him in a downtown bar, the kind with low ceilings, amber lighting, and the scent of stale whiskey soaked into the wood. Hello, Ethan, I said, sliding into the booth across from him. He looked up, clearly startled. He hadn't been expecting me. Jenna, he frowned, setting his drink down. What are you doing here? I folded my hands on the table, keeping my voice calm. I know about the will. His entire body tensed. What do you mean? I leaned closer, voice quiet. I found the original document. The one in Dad's study. The estate was supposed to be split. 50-50. But Sabrina made sure that didn't happen. Ethan exhaled slowly and ran a hand down his face. He didn't look shocked. You already knew, I said. It wasn't a question. He hesitated. I had a feeling. I never saw anything concrete, but Sabrina runs everything. The house, the accounts, all of it. I stopped asking questions a long time ago. Of course he did. Sabrina had always worn the crown in their relationship. Ethan was just along for the ride. But I hadn't come here to judge him. I came to use him. Listen, I said, softening my tone. I don't care about the money. I never have. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. That's not what Sabrina thinks. She thinks a lot of things, I said quietly. But she's wrong. I leaned in again, my eyes steady on his. I don't want her inheritance. I just want her to answer for what she did. Ethan's eyes locked with mine. His expression unreadable. Ethan stared at me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, he let out a low, bitter laugh. God, I'd actually love to see her brought down, he muttered, shaking his head. But Sabrina, she always comes out on top, Jenna. She's untouchable. Not this time, I said quietly, because I knew something she didn't, and I was ready to use it. Over the next few days, I began peeling back the layers of Sabrina's flawless life. Not her finances, not the deeds or assets. I was looking for something deeper. Something personal. It didn't take long. One late night, I was scrolling through old social media posts when I found it. A photo from a trip to Italy 3 years ago. Sabrina looked radiant in the picture, surrounded by friends, drinking wine under the Tuscan sun. But there was one glaring problem. Ethan had never been on that trip. I clicked on the tag names. One in particular caught my attention. Ryan Mercer. He wasn't just a friend. I dug deeper, scrolling through Ryan's profile, skimming comment threads and old replies. It was all there. Inside jokes, late-night messages, flirtatious emojis, dated interactions that spanned years. Sabrina had been unfaithful. And she hadn't even been discreet. My heart pounded. This was it. My first move. Because revenge didn't always come in the form of explosions. It could be subtle, calculated, and perfectly timed. I compiled the evidence, screenshots, messages, timestamps, and sent them to Ethan. No explanation, no context. Just the truth. His response came almost instantly. Where did you get these? Does it matter? I typed back. You deserve to know. There was a pause. Then, meet me tomorrow. We need to talk. I smiled. Checkmate, Sabrina. The next evening, we met at a quiet little cafe on the edge of town. Ethan was already seated, hunched over a mug of untouched coffee, eyes glued to the table. When he looked up and saw me, I could tell he had seen everything. I took the seat across from him. For a moment, we sat in silence. The air between us felt fragile, taut with emotion. How long? He asked finally, his voice strained. I exhaled. From what I found, at least 4 years. He let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. Of course. He tried lifting the coffee to his lips, but his hand trembled too much to drink. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, I said softly. And this time I meant it. No, you're not, he said, locking eyes with mine. You wanted me to know. You planned this. I didn't argue. Yes, but only because Sabrina needed to be exposed. Exposed? He echoed. She's been playing everyone. Me. You. Your parents. Everyone. He rubbed a hand through his hair. And now what? What do you want from me, Jenna? I leaned forward. I don't want anything from you. Not money. Not sympathy. I just want to see her face when her world finally caves in. Ethan studied me for a long time. Then a slow, dark smile curved at the corners of his lips. You're not the only one who feels that way. We sat there for nearly an hour trading stories, connecting the dots. All the lies. The manipulation. The forged will. Ethan's anger wasn't loud or chaotic. It was steady, focused, dangerous. I want a divorce, he said finally, his voice sharp and clear. And I'm going for full custody of the kids. It was a bold move. Calculated. Devastating. Sabrina had spent years building the image of a picture-perfect life. Loving wife. Devoted mother. Ethan was about to tear that fantasy to pieces. The next morning, I watched from a distance as the lawyer handed her the divorce papers. Sabrina answered the door in a silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly styled, coffee in hand. But the moment her eyes landed on the envelope, her expression collapsed. Her manicured fingers clutched the papers tightly, knuckles turning white. For a second, she glanced around, not at Ethan, not even at her children. No. She looked toward the neighbors. She was more concerned about what they'd think than the fact that her marriage was over. Classic Sabrina. I could have stopped there. Let Ethan take it from here. But I wasn't done. Sabrina still thought she could control the story, that she could manipulate her way out of it all. She was wrong. That evening, with a few clicks, I sent out everything: screenshots, messages, photos. But I didn't send them to Ethan. I sent them to everyone who mattered to her. The mothers from her kids' school group chats, the charity board she chaired, the neighborhood association. Within hours, her phone was on fire. At first, she tried denying it, tried claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But there was too much proof, too many receipts. By the next day, her pristine world had crumbled. Her inner circle had vanished. The women she once gossiped with now ignored her. The board she led requested her resignation. And Ethan? He moved out. Took the children with him. For the first time in her life, Sabrina was completely alone. The thing about people like Sabrina is, they never believe the rules apply to them. They twist, spin, and lie until everyone else begins to question their own version of reality. They always assume they'll land on their feet. But not this time. I had made sure of that. A week after I exposed her affair, Sabrina was in freefall. Her social life was gone. Her image destroyed. Her marriage shattered. But she wasn't the type to go quietly. She called me at work. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to ignore her. But something in me wanted to hear what she had to say. I answered on the third ring. You ruined my life, she said, her voice hoarse and raw. No, Sabrina, I replied calmly. You did that all on your own. She laughed, sharp, bitter. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won. I don't need to win, I said. I just wanted the truth to come out. There was silence. Then her voice turned icy. You don't understand, Jenna. You think you've taken everything from me? Fine. But you better watch your back. I've got nothing left to lose. And then she hung up. A normal person might have been afraid. But this was Sabrina. She was all bark. Still, I wasn't about to let my guard down. Not yet. She may have lost her friends, her marriage, her status, but one thing remained: the house. I didn't want the money, but I had to finish what I started. So I made a call. Ethan, I said, do you still have the original copy of the will? Yeah. I do, he replied, puzzled. Why? I smiled. Because it's time to fix what she broke. It took a few weeks of paperwork and coordination. But eventually my lawyer filed the case. Sabrina had committed a crime, altering a legal document. With Ethan's testimony and the original will as evidence, she didn't stand a chance. The court ruled in my favor. My parents' true wishes were reinstated. And that meant half of everything, including the house, now belonged to me. I'll never forget the expression on Sabrina's face when the sheriff arrived at the front door with the eviction notice in hand. You can't do this, she shrieked, her voice rising with fury. This is my house. Not anymore, I replied, standing calmly in the doorway. You took everything from me, Sabrina. And now I'm just reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Her whole body trembled, fists clenched tightly at her sides. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, her voice cracking, desperation leaking through. I tilted my head slightly. I guess you'll have to learn how to be independent now. And with the sweetest smile I could muster, I handed her one final parting gift, an old, second-hand bicycle. The same kind my parents gave me on my 16th birthday. Without another word, I turned around, walked back inside, and shut the door behind me, leaving her standing on the porch alone. For the first time in her life, Sabrina had no one to lean on. And for the first time in my life, I was finally free. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. As I moved through the hallways, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. No more judgmental stares. No more whispered conversations comparing me to Sabrina. This house, it was mine now. Not just on paper, but in every way that mattered. Yet as I stood in the expansive living room, surrounded by designer furniture and flawless decor, something unexpected settled in. I felt nothing. This place had never been a home. It was a war zone. A monument to everything I had never been given. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. The very next day, I put the house on the market. Not for money. Not out of spite. But for freedom. This house had been Sabrina's kingdom. My parents' shrine to their perfect daughter. I didn't want to carry that with me into the next chapter of my life. I watched from a distance as a realtor hammered the for sale sign into the front lawn. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was letting something go. I felt like I was finally winning. Sabrina, on the other hand, wasn't doing so well. Word through mutual acquaintances was that her life had quickly unraveled. With Ethan awarded full custody and no one to fund her lavish lifestyle, she fell hard. The last time I saw her, she was living in a cramped apartment on the edge of town, dragging herself through a job she clearly hated. No more doting friends. No more designer handbags. No safety net. She was finally living the kind of life she had once scoffed at. But the strange thing was I didn't feel triumphant. And I didn't feel guilty either. I just felt done. Most of the money I received from my parents' estate, I gave it away. Not to make a statement. Not for revenge. But because I never needed it to begin with. I had built my life without their support and I wasn't about to let their wealth define me now. I kept just enough to start over somewhere new. A different city. A different life. One where I wasn't Jenna, the forgotten daughter. I was just Jenna. A week before I moved, Aunt Doreen invited me over for dinner. She had been the only family member who truly stood by me through all of it. As we sat across from one another at her modest kitchen table, she reached for my hand. "You know," she said gently, "your parents were wrong about you." I raised a brow. "Were they?" She smiled sadly. "They always said you didn't need them. That you were too independent. Too strong. But the truth is, they needed you." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Aunt Doreen sighed. "They built their entire world around Sabrina because she needed their help. Their attention. Their money. You, though, you thrived without it. And that scared them." Her words echoed inside me, sinking deeper with each passing second. Maybe she was right. Maybe my parents didn't ignore me because I wasn't enough. Maybe they ignored me because they knew I didn't need them. Not the way Sabrina did. And for the first time ever, that realization didn't hurt. That night, I packed the last of my belongings. I stood in the doorway of my old bedroom one final time. The girl who had once lived here, the one who spent years chasing approval, craving affection, constantly trying to prove she was worthy, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had nothing left to prove. I picked up my bags, walked through the door, and never looked back. Because my past didn't define me. My future did.